Marcus Williams never imagined that a simple trip to the corner store would change his life forever. The 34-year-old single father had been working double shifts at the local warehouse for months, trying to make ends meet after his wife, Sarah, passed away from cancer 2 years earlier. His 8-year-old daughter, Emma, was his entire world, and every decision he made revolved around giving her the best life possible, despite their financial struggles. It was a Tuesday evening in October, when Marcus decided to stop by Tony's convenience store on Maple Street. He had just finished his second shift and needed to pick up some milk and bread for Emma's school lunch the next day. The store was one of those family-owned places that had been serving the neighborhood for over 30 years. Tony DeLuca, Joyce's 67-year-old owner, knew every customer by name and always asked about their families. As Marcus pushed open the glass door, the familiar chime announced his arrival. Tony looked up from behind the counter where he was counting the day's receipts. The older man's weathered face broke into a warm smile when he saw Marcus approaching. "Hey there, Marcus. How's little Emma doing in school this year?" Tony asked, his thick Italian accent making every word sound like a warm embrace. "She's doing great, Tony. Made honor roll again last month," Marcus replied, pride evident in his voice as he grabbed a basket and headed toward the dairy section. The store was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigeration units and the distant sound of traffic on the main road. Marcus had always appreciated the peaceful atmosphere of Tony's store. It was one of the few places in the neighborhood where he could take a moment to breathe and think about something other than bills and work schedules. As he reached for a gallon of milk, Marcus noticed another customer enter the store. Through the reflection in the refrigerator door, he could see a young man, probably in his early 20s, wearing a dark hoodie pulled low over his face. Something about the way the stranger moved seemed off. Nervous, jittery, constantly, looking around as if he was expecting trouble. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts over the years. Growing up in a rough neighborhood and later working security part-time during college had taught him to read people and situations quickly. The young man's body language screamed danger, but Marcus tried to push the feeling aside. Maybe he was just being paranoid after working such long hours. He continued shopping, picking up a loaf of whole wheat bread and some peanut butter. Emma had been asking for her favorite sandwich for days, and Marcus had promised to make it for her lunch. As he moved through the narrow aisles, he kept the hooded figure in his peripheral vision. Tony was still at the counter, now organizing lottery tickets and chatting with Mrs. Rodriguez, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment building across the street. She was a regular customer who came in every evening to buy ingredients for dinner and catch up on neighborhood gossip with Tony. "My grandson just started at the community college," Mrs. Rodriguez was saying, her voice filled with pride. "First in our family to go to college, you know." "That's wonderful, Maria. Education is so important," Tony replied, genuinely interested in her family's success story. Marcus smiled at the familiar scene. This was what he loved about the neighborhood. Despite all its problems, there were still pockets of genuine community where people cared about each other. It reminded him of why he had chosen to stay here even after Sarah's death, despite friends suggesting he move to a safer area. The hooded young man had been browsing the snack aisle for several minutes, picking up items and putting them back, down. Marcus noticed his hands were shaking and he kept reaching into his front pocket as if checking for something. Every few seconds he would glance toward the counter where Tony and Mrs. Rodriguez were still talking. Marcus finished gathering his items and headed toward the counter to pay. He had exactly $12 in his wallet, enough for the milk, bread, and peanut butter with a little change left over. Money was always tight, but he had learned to budget carefully and make every dollar count. "Will that be all for you tonight, Marcus?" Tony asked as he began scanning the items. "Yes, that should do it," Marcus replied, pulling out his worn leather wallet. Mrs. Rodriguez had finished her shopping and was slowly making her way toward the door, carrying a small bag of groceries. She moved carefully, using a wooden cane that had belonged to her late husband. Marcus had seen her make this same journey countless times over the past 2 years. That's when everything changed. The young man in the hoodie suddenly moved toward the counter with quick, determined steps. Marcus noticed the change immediately. The nervous energy had transformed into something more focused and dangerous. As the stranger approached Tony, Marcus saw him reach into his pocket and pull out what looked like a small handgun. "Open the register, old man," the young man said in a voice that was trying to sound tough but betrayed his nervousness. "Give me all the money and nobody gets hurt." Mrs. Rodriguez gasped and nearly dropped her groceries. Tony's face went pale, but he remained remarkably calm for someone facing a gun. Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but his mind became crystal clear, a response he had experienced before in crisis situations. The robber's hand was shaking as he pointed the weapon at Tony. Marcus could see that the young man was scared, which made him even more dangerous. Scared people with weapons often made poor decisions that could result in tragedy. "Please, son, just put the gun down," Tony said quietly, his hands raised slightly. "I'll give you whatever you want." Marcus was standing about 6 feet away from the robber, close enough to act but far enough away to assess the situation carefully. He noticed several important details. The gun appeared to be real, but the young man clearly had no experience handling weapons. His finger was on the trigger, which was dangerous, and his attention was focused entirely on Tony and the cash register. Most people in this situation would either run for the exit or hit the floor. Marcus understood both responses, but something inside him refused to leave Tony and Mrs. Rodriguez in danger. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about protecting innocent people who had shown him kindness when he needed it most. Marcus took a slow, deep breath and made a decision that would surprise everyone in that store, including himself. Instead of panicking or trying to escape, he stepped closer to the counter and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "Hey there," Marcus said to the young robber, his tone friendly and non-threatening. "Looks like you're having a rough day." The hooded man spun around, pointing the gun directly at Marcus. Up close, Marcus could see that the robber was even younger than he had initially thought, probably no more than 19 or 20. His eyes were wide with fear and desperation, and Marcus noticed track marks on his arms. This wasn't just a robbery. This was likely someone trying to get money for drugs. "Back off, man! This isn't your business!" the young man shouted, his voice cracking with nervous energy. "You're right, it's not," Marcus agreed, keeping his hands visible and his body language relaxed. "But I'm already here, so we're all in this together now." Tony and Mrs. Rodriguez watched in amazement as Marcus continued talking to the armed robber, as if they were having a casual conversation. Most people would have been terrified, but Marcus seemed genuinely calm and in control of the situation. "What's your name?" Marcus asked the robber. "What? Why do you care?" The young man replied, confused by the question. "Well, we're going to be here together for a few minutes, so I thought I should know what to call you. I'm Marcus, by the way." The robber looked bewildered. This clearly wasn't how he had imagined the robbery going. My name's Kevin," he said automatically, then immediately looked angry at himself for revealing personal information. "Nice to meet you, Kevin," Marcus said sincerely. "So tell me, what's really going on here? This doesn't seem like something you really want to be doing." Kevin's hand was still shaking as he held the gun, but Marcus noticed that he had lowered it slightly. The young man's tough exterior was beginning to crack, and Marcus could see the scared kid underneath. "I need the money, okay? I owe some people, and they're going to hurt me if I don't pay them back," Kevin said, his voice becoming more desperate. "How much do you owe them?" Marcus asked. $300, Kevin replied. "I know it doesn't sound like much, but these guys don't mess around." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. $300 was a significant amount of money for him, but he understood that for someone in Kevin's situation, it might as well have been 3,000. Drug debts had a way of becoming life-or-death situations very quickly. "Okay, so you need $300, Marcus said. "But Kevin, look around this place. Tony's working here alone on a Tuesday night in October. How much money do you really think is in that register?" Kevin glanced around the small store as if seeing it clearly for the first time. Marcus was right. This wasn't exactly a high-end establishment that would have hundreds of dollars in cash lying around. "I don't know," Kevin admitted. "Maybe 150? "Probably closer to 50, Marcus agreed. "So even if you take all of Tony's money, you're still going to be short by at least $250. And then you'll have committed armed robbery for nothing." The logic of Marcus's words was starting to sink in, Kevin looked around again, taking in the worn linoleum floors, the outdated fixtures, and the modest selection of products. This clearly wasn't a store that was making anyone rich. But I have to try, Kevin said, his voice now sounding more like a plea than a threat. I don't have any other options. There are always other options, Marcus said gently. They might not be easy, and they might not be quick, but they exist. Tony, who had been quietly listening to the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. Kevin, son, how old are you? 19, Kevin replied, without thinking. 19, Tony repeated sadly. You're just a baby. What would your mother say if she could see you right now? Kevin's face crumpled slightly at the mention of his mother. She's dead, he said quietly. Died when I was 15. The store fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerators. Marcus felt a surge of understanding. He knew what it was, like to lose someone important and feel completely alone in the world. I'm sorry about your mom, Marcus said sincerely. I lost my wife 2 years ago, so I understand how that feels. Yeah? Well, did you start doing drugs to deal with it? Kevin asked bitterly. No, but I thought about it, Marcus admitted honestly. There were nights when I wanted to do anything that would make the pain stop. The only thing that kept me from going down that road was my daughter. Kevin looked surprised by Marcus's honesty. He had expected judgment or lectures, not understanding and empathy. I don't have a daughter, Kevin said. I don't have anyone. That's not true, Mrs. Rodriguez suddenly said, speaking for the first time since the robbery began. You have us, right here, right now. Kevin stared at the elderly woman in confusion. What do you mean? I mean that we're all here together and we all want to help you figure this out, she said, her voice warm and grandmotherly. You don't have to do this alone. Marcus watched as Kevin processed this unexpected response. The young man had clearly come into the store expecting fear, resistance, or maybe even violence. Instead, he was being met with compassion and genuine concern for his well-being. You don't understand, Kevin said, his voice breaking. These guys I owe money to, they're not going to just forget about it. They'll find me. Where are they now? Marcus asked. They gave me until tomorrow morning to get the money, Kevin said. If I don't have it by then we have time to figure something else out, Marcus said firmly. Kevin looked at Marcus as if he had lost his mind. What are you talking about? There is no something else. This is it. This is my only option. Kevin, I want you to think about what happens next if you go through with this, Marcus said calmly. Let's say you take the $50 or $60 from Tony's register. You leave here and you're still short the money you need. But now you've committed armed robbery, which means the police are looking for you. And when those guys you owe money, to find out you tried to rob a store and still don't have their money, what do you think they're going to do? Kevin's face went pale as the reality of Marcus's words hit him. He hadn't thought beyond getting the money from the register. The idea that he might still be in danger even after committing the robbery clearly hadn't occurred to him. I didn't think about that, Kevin admitted, his gun hand dropping to his side. That's because you're scared and desperate, and when people are scared and desperate, they don't always think clearly, Marcus said understandingly. But that's why it's good to have other people around to help you see the bigger picture. Tony had been watching this extraordinary exchange with growing amazement. In his 30 years of running the store, he had heard about robberies at other businesses, but he never could have imagined one unfolding like this. Kevin, Tony said gently, why don't you put that gun away so we can all think more clearly? Kevin looked down at the weapon in his hand as if he had forgotten he was holding it. But if I put it away, you'll call the police. Actually, Marcus said, I think we should call the police either way. Kevin's eyes went wide with panic. What? No, you can't do that. Wait, hear me out, Marcus said quickly, holding up his hands. The people you owe money to, they're criminals, right? Drug dealers? Yeah, so? So the police deal with people like that all the time. They have programs to help people get out of situations exactly like yours. Kevin shook his head vigorously. You don't understand. You can't just call the cops on these guys. They have connections. They'll know I talked. Marcus could see that. Kevin was becoming agitated again, so he changed his approach. Okay, forget about the police for a minute. Let's focus on the immediate problem. You need $300 by tomorrow morning. Right, which is why I'm here, Kevin said, raising the gun slightly. But we've already established that robbing this store won't get you $300, Marcus pointed out. So what if we found another way? Like what? Kevin asked skeptically. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. He looked around the store, taking in Tony's worried face and Mrs. Rodriguez's concerned expression. Then an idea began to form. What kind of work experience do you have? Marcus asked. Kevin looked confused by the question. Work experience? I don't know, not much. I worked at a fast food place for a few months before I got fired. Why did you get fired? I kept showing up late because I was using, Kevin admitted. But you could do the job when you were there? Yeah, I guess. It wasn't rocket science. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Tony, how much help do you need around the store? Tony looked surprised by the question. Well, I've been thinking about hiring someone part-time, especially for the evening shift. It gets lonely here by myself, and I'm not as young as I used to be. What would something like that pay? Marcus asked. I could probably afford $10 an hour for about 20 hours a week, Tony said. So maybe $200 a week. Kevin was following the conversation but didn't seem to understand where it was heading. What does this have to do with anything? I need money tomorrow, not next week. You're right, Marcus agreed. But what if Tony was willing to advance you some of that money? Tony looked thoughtful. I suppose I could advance a week's pay to the right person. That would be $200, Marcus calculated. Kevin, you said you needed $300. What if we could find a way to get you the other $100? Kevin stared at Marcus in disbelief. You're talking about giving me a job after I just tried to rob this place? I'm talking about giving you an alternative to robbing this place, Marcus corrected. The question is, are you willing to work for the money instead of stealing it? For the first time since entering the store, Kevin seemed to be considering something other than the robbery. Marcus could see him processing the possibility that there might actually be another way out of his situation. But what about the guys? I owe money too? Kevin asked. Even if I had $200, I'd still be short. How reasonable are these people? Marcus asked. If you showed up with $200 and a plan to pay the rest within a week, would they listen? Kevin thought about it. Maybe. I mean, they want their money back. If they kill me, they don't get anything. Exactly, Marcus said. Business is business. They'd rather get paid than hurt someone who can't pay them. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been quietly listening to the entire exchange, suddenly spoke up. I have some money saved up, she said. Not much, but maybe I could help with the rest. Everyone turned to look at her in surprise. Kevin seemed particularly shocked that this stranger would offer to help him. Mrs. Rodriguez, you don't need to do that, Marcus said gently. Yes, I do, she said firmly. This boy is in trouble, and we have a chance to help him. That's what people should do for each other. Kevin's eyes filled with tears. I don't understand, he said quietly. Why would you help me? You don't even know me. Because everyone deserves a second chance, Mrs. Rodriguez said simply. And because I have a grandson about your age, I would hope that if he ever got into trouble, someone would help him too. Marcus watched as Kevin struggled with emotions he clearly wasn't used to dealing with. The young man had walked into the store expecting to commit a crime, but instead he had found something he probably hadn't experienced in years. Genuine human kindness and concern. I don't know what to say, Kevin said, his voice barely above a whisper. You could start by putting that gun away, Tony suggested gently. Kevin looked down at the weapon again, then slowly placed it on the counter. It's not even loaded, he admitted. I was too scared to buy bullets. The admission brought a mixture of relief and sadness to everyone in the store. Relief that no one had actually been in mortal danger, but sadness that a 19-year-old kid had been so desperate that he was willing to commit armed robbery with an empty gun. Marcus felt a wave of profound sadness wash over him as he looked at Kevin. The young man was clearly at the lowest point of his life, desperate enough to attempt armed robbery, but too scared to even load the weapon. It reminded Marcus of his own darkest moments after Sarah's death, when he had felt completely alone and overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. "Kevin," Marcus said softly, "when was the last time you ate a real meal?" Kevin thought about it for a moment. "I don't remember. Maybe 3 days ago." Without hesitation, Tony walked over to the small deli section of his store and began preparing a sandwich. "Sit down," he told Kevin, gesturing to a small table near the window that he kept for customers who wanted to eat in the store. Kevin hesitated, still processing the surreal turn of events. "I can't pay for food." "Did I ask you to pay?" Tony replied, continuing to layer turkey and cheese onto fresh bread. "Sit." As Kevin reluctantly took a seat, Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call my neighbor to check on my daughter," he explained. "Then we're going to figure out exactly how to handle this situation." Mrs. Rodriguez had been watching everything with the shrewd eye of someone who had lived through many difficult times. "Kevin," she said, settling into the chair across from him, "tell me about these people you owe money to. What are their names?" Kevin looked nervous about sharing details. "Why do you want to know?" "Because I've lived in this neighborhood for 43 years, she said matter-of-factly. "I know everyone and everyone knows me. Maybe I know these people you're scared of." "Their names are Rico and Danny," Kevin said reluctantly. "They hang around the park on 5th Street. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded knowingly. "Rico Martinez and Danny Fuentes, I know those boys. I used to babysit Rico when he was little." Kevin's eyes widened in surprise. "You know Rico?" "I know his grandmother better," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "She comes to my church. Rico's not as tough as he pretends to be. He's just trying to make money to help support his little sisters." This information seemed to change Kevin's entire perspective on the situation. The terrifying drug dealers who had been threatening him suddenly became real people with their own struggles and motivations. Tony finished making the sandwich and placed it in front of Kevin, along with a bottle of water and a bag of chips. "Eat," he said simply. As Kevin began eating hungrily, Marcus finished his phone call and rejoined the group. "Okay, my daughter is fine," he announced. "Now let's make a plan." "First things first," Marcus continued. "Kevin needs to get clean. You can't hold down a job or deal with this situation properly while you're using drugs." Kevin nodded while chewing his sandwich. "I know. I've been wanting to quit, but it's hard when everything in your life is falling apart." "There's a treatment center about 10 miles from here," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "My nephew went there last year. They have good programs and they work with people who don't have insurance." "But what about the money I owe?" Kevin asked. "Even if I start treatment, Rico and Danny are still going to want their $300. "That's where we come in," Marcus said. "Tony's offered you a job with an advance of $200. Mrs. Rodriguez is willing to help with some of the remaining money, and I might be able to help with the rest." Kevin stared at Marcus in disbelief. "You would do that for me? After what I tried to do here tonight?" "Kevin, you didn't actually hurt anyone," Marcus pointed out. "You made a desperate decision in a desperate situation, but when you were given another option, you took it. That tells me a lot about who you really are." The truth was that Marcus saw something of himself in Kevin's situation. After Sarah's death, there had been moments when he had felt so overwhelmed that he could have made equally poor decisions. The only thing that had saved him was having Emma to think about, and a few people who had shown him kindness when he needed it most. "Here's what I think we should do," Marcus said, taking charge of the situation. "Tomorrow morning, you and I are going to go talk to Rico and Danny together. We're going to explain that you have part of the money and a plan to pay the rest within a week." "You would come with me?" Kevin asked, clearly amazed by the offer. "Of course. This is too important to handle alone." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled approvingly. "And I'll talk to Rico's grandmother. She has more influence over that boy than he wants to admit." Tony nodded in agreement. "And Kevin, if you're serious about the job, we can start with a few hours tomorrow evening. That way you can see if you like the work before committing to anything permanent. Kevin finished his sandwich and sat back in his chair, looking around at the three people who had just offered to completely change his life. Tears were streaming down his face, and he made no effort to hide them. "I don't understand why you're all being so nice to me," he said. "I came in here to rob you." "But you didn't rob us," Tony pointed out. "And more importantly, when we offered you a better way, you listened. That takes courage." Marcus leaned forward and looked Kevin directly in the eyes. "Kevin, I want you to understand something. What happened here tonight wasn't about you being weak or bad. You got caught up in drugs because you were dealing with pain from losing your mother. That's understandable. The question now is what you're going to do going forward." "I want to get better," Kevin said quietly. "I really do. I just didn't think anyone would help me." "Well, now you know different," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly. "But Kevin, you have to understand that this is going to be hard work. Getting clean isn't easy, and neither is rebuilding your life. We can help you, but you have to do the work." Kevin nodded seriously. "I understand. I'm ready to try." Marcus felt a surge of hope as he looked at the young man. There was something different about Kevin now. A spark of determination that hadn't been there when he first walked into the store with a gun. "Okay, let's talk specifics," Marcus said. "Kevin, where are you staying right now?" "Nowhere, really. I've been sleeping. In different places, sometimes the park, sometimes the old warehouse district." Tony and Mrs. Rodriguez exchanged a look of concern. "That's not safe," Tony said. "Especially not if you're trying to get clean." "I have a small apartment above my store," Tony continued. "It's not much, but it has a bed and a kitchen. You could stay there while you're getting back on your feet." Kevin looked overwhelmed by the generosity. "I can't accept that. You've already done too much." "Kevin," Marcus said gently, "sometimes you have to let people help you. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart." The next morning arrived faster than anyone expected. Marcus had stayed awake most of the night thinking about Kevin and the promise he had made to help confront Rico and Danny. He had called in sick to work, something he rarely did, but he knew this was more important than any shift at the warehouse. Marcus picked up Kevin at Tony's store at exactly 9 o'clock. The young man looked different in daylight, cleaner, more alert, and definitely more nervous about what lay ahead. Tony had given him some of his own clothes to wear, and Mrs. Rodriguez had brought breakfast from her kitchen. "You ready for this?" Marcus asked as they walked toward 5th Street Park. "No," Kevin admitted honestly. "But I know I have to do it." The park was exactly what Marcus had expected. A small, run-down area with broken playground equipment and several groups of young men hanging around looking like they had nothing better to do. Marcus spotted Rico and Danny immediately based on Kevin's description. They were sitting on a bench near the basketball court, watching everyone who came and went. Rico was a stocky young man in his early 20s with multiple tattoos covering his arms. Danny was taller and thinner with nervous eyes that constantly scanned the area. When they saw Kevin approaching with Marcus, both men stood up with expressions of suspicion and mild hostility. "Kevin," Rico called out, his voice carrying across the park. "You got my money?" Kevin's hands were shaking, but he walked steadily toward the two men. Marcus stayed close beside him, offering silent moral support. "I got some of it," Kevin said when they reached the bench. $200, and I have a plan for the rest." Rico's expression darkened. "200? That's not what we agreed on, man. We said 300 by this morning." "I know what we agreed on," Kevin said, his voice getting stronger. "But this is better than the nothing you would have gotten if I had gone through with robbing that store." Danny looked confused. "What store? What are you talking about?" Kevin explained what had happened the night before, including his failed attempt at armed robbery and the help he had received from Marcus, Tony, and Mrs. Rodriguez. Both Rico and Danny listened with growing amazement. "Wait," Rico said, looking at Marcus suspiciously. "You're the guy who talked him out of robbing the store?" "That's right," Marcus replied calmly. "And now you're here helping him deal with us?" That's right too. Rico studied Marcus carefully, clearly trying to figure out what kind of person would get involved in someone else's drug debt problems. What's in this for you? Nothing, Marcus said honestly. Kevin needs help, and I'm in a position to help him. That's all? Danny looked skeptical. Nobody does nothing for nothing. What's your angle? Marcus thought about how to explain his motivations in a way these young men would understand. 2 years ago, my wife died of cancer. I was left alone with an 8-year-old daughter, 2 jobs, and more bills than I could handle. I was angry, depressed, and desperate. If it hadn't been for a few people who showed me kindness when I needed it most, I might have ended up making the same kinds of mistakes Kevin has made. Rico's expression softened slightly. You got a daughter? Yes. Emma. She's 8. My little sister is 9, Rico said quietly. That's actually why I need the money Kevin owes me. My mom's behind on rent, and my sisters need school supplies. This revelation changed the entire dynamic of the conversation. Suddenly, Rico wasn't just a threatening drug dealer. He was a young man trying to help support his family. How much do you actually need? Marcus asked. Rico looked surprised by the question. What do you mean? I mean, how much money do you need to help your mother with rent and get your sisters their school supplies? Rico thought about it. Probably about $400 total. $300 from Kevin, and I was hoping to make another $100 from other business. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. And Danny, what about you? What do you need the money for? Danny looked uncomfortable with the personal question. I don't see how that's any of your business. Maybe it's not, Marcus agreed. But maybe if we understood what everyone actually needs, we could find a solution that works for everyone. Kevin spoke up. Danny's got a baby on the way. His girlfriend's pregnant and they need money for doctor visits. Danny shot Kevin an angry look. I didn't tell you to share my business. Look, Marcus said, addressing all 3 young men. It sounds like everyone here is dealing with money problems and family responsibilities. What if instead of fighting over $300, we figured out a way for everyone to make some legitimate money? Rico laughed bitterly. Yeah, right. Like there's a bunch of good jobs just waiting for guys like us. Actually, there might be, Marcus said. Tony needs help at his store. The warehouse where I work is always looking for reliable people, and Mrs. Rodriguez knows about a construction company that hires day laborers. Day labor doesn't pay enough, Danny said dismissively. It pays more than dealing drugs when you factor in the risk, Marcus pointed out. And it's money you don't have to worry about losing to arrests or robberies. Rico was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking about what Marcus had said. You really think you could help us find legitimate work? I think I could help you find opportunities, Marcus corrected. But you'd have to do the work yourselves, and you'd have to be reliable. No showing up high or hungover. Kevin looked at his former dealers with new understanding. Rico, maybe we could both work at Tony's store. He said he might need more. Then one person if business picks up. And what about the money I already owe you? Kevin asked. Rico considered this. If you can get me $150 by next week and help me find some legitimate work, we'll call it even. Marcus felt a surge of relief. This was much more reasonable than the original $300 demand, and it gave Kevin a realistic chance to make things right. I can help with that, Marcus said. Between Tony's advance and some money Mrs. Rodriguez and I can contribute, $150 is manageable. Danny had been listening to the entire exchange with growing interest. What about me? I still need money for my girlfriend's medical bills. How much are we talking about? Marcus asked. The doctor wants $200 up front for prenatal care, Danny said. Marcus thought about it. Tony might need more help than just Kevin. And like I said, my warehouse is always looking for people. If you're willing to work nights, I could probably get you an interview. Danny looked skeptical but interested. What kind of work? Loading and unloading trucks, organizing inventory, basic warehouse stuff. It's not glamorous, but it pays $12 an hour. and they offer overtime during busy seasons. That's more than I make dealing, Danny admitted quietly. Rico was still processing everything that had been discussed. So let me get this straight. Kevin pays me $150 instead of $300, but you help all of us find real jobs? That's the idea, Marcus confirmed. But everyone has to be committed to making it work. That means staying clean, showing up on time, and working hard. Kevin looked at Rico and Danny with something approaching hope. What do you guys think? It's got to be better than always looking over our shoulders, wondering when we're going to get arrested or robbed. Rico was quiet for a long time, staring at the broken playground equipment and the run-down buildings surrounding the park. Finally, he spoke. My little sisters ask me why I'm always stressed out and why I can't play with them like I used to. I tell them I'm just busy, but the truth is I'm always worried about something bad happening. So you'll try it? Marcus asked. Yeah, Rico said, extending his hand to Kevin. We'll try it. But Kevin, this is your one chance, man. If you mess this up, our deal is off. Kevin shook Rico's hand gratefully. I won't mess it up, I promise. Danny was still hesitant. What if the warehouse doesn't hire me? Then we'll find something else, Marcus said firmly. There are always options if you're willing to look for them and work for them. As they prepared to leave the park, Rico pulled Marcus aside. Why are you really doing this? And don't give me that stuff about kindness. Nobody puts themselves in the middle of drug debt situations just to be nice. Marcus looked at the young man seriously. Rico, when my wife was dying, there were days when I didn't know how I was going to pay for her medications and still keep food on the table for my daughter. I was working 16-hour days and still coming up short. One day I broke down crying in the pharmacy because I couldn't afford Sarah's pain medication. Rico listened intently as Marcus continued. The pharmacist, a guy I had never really talked to before, quietly paid for the prescription himself. He didn't make a big deal about it, didn't want me to pay him back, just said that sometimes people need help and when you can help, you should. That's it, Rico asked. That's it, Marcus confirmed. Kevin walked into that store last night desperate and alone, just like I was desperate and alone in that pharmacy. The difference is that this time I was in a position to help instead of needing help. Rico nodded slowly, beginning to understand. So, you're not trying to save us or change our lives or anything like that? No, Marcus said. I'm just offering you guys the same chance that someone offered me, an opportunity to find a better way forward. What you do with that opportunity is entirely up to you. As they walked back toward Tony's store, Kevin fell into step beside Marcus. I still can't believe this is really happening, he said. Yesterday I thought my life was over, and now you have a chance to start over, Marcus finished. But Kevin, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be easy. Getting clean is hard work. Learning to live without drugs is hard work. Showing up to a job every day when you don't feel like it is hard work. I know, Kevin said. But it's got to be easier than living the way I was living. When they arrived at the store, Tony and Mrs. Rodriguez were waiting anxiously to hear how the meeting had gone. Mrs. Rodriguez had been particularly worried, having known Rico since he was a small child. So? Tony asked as soon as they walked through the door. It went better than expected, Marcus reported. Rico's willing to accept $150 instead of $300 if Kevin can pay it by next week, and both Rico and Danny are interested in finding legitimate work. Mrs. Rodriguez clapped her hands together in delight. I knew Rico was a good boy underneath all that tough talk. His grandmother raised him right. Tony looked pleased but practical. Kevin, are you ready to start working today? I could use help with inventory, and it would give you a chance to earn some of that money you need. Yes, sir, Kevin said eagerly. I'm ready to start right now. As Kevin began his first day of legitimate work in months, Marcus realized that something important had happened in Tony's store the night before. It wasn't just that a robbery had been prevented or that a young man had been given a second chance. What had happened was that a community had come together to solve a problem that none of them could have handled alone. 6 months later, Marcus, walked into Tony's convenience store for his usual evening visit, but everything looked different. The store had been renovated with new floors, fresh paint, and updated equipment. Behind the counter, Kevin was efficiently handling 2 customers, while Rico restocked shelves in the background. "Hey, Marcus," Kevin called out cheerfully. "Emma's cookies are in aisle 3, right where she likes them." Marcus smiled as he watched Kevin work. The transformation had been remarkable. The scared, desperate young man from that October night had become a confident, reliable employee who now managed most of Tony's evening operations. Kevin had been clean for 5 months and had even started taking business classes at the community college. "How's business been?" Marcus asked Tony, who was organizing receipts at a small desk behind the counter. "Better than it's been in years," Tony replied with obvious pride. "Having Kevin and Rico here has allowed me to extend our hours and offer new services. We're even talking about opening a second location." Rico looked up from his work and grinned. "My mom says I'm the first person in our family to ever have a real career plan. I'm saving money to start my own business someday." The success stories extended beyond just the store. Danny had indeed gotten the job at Marcus's warehouse and had quickly been promoted to shift supervisor. His girlfriend Sarah had given birth to a healthy baby girl 3 months earlier, and Danny was now one of the most reliable employees at the company. Mrs. Rodriguez entered the store carrying a newspaper, her face beaming with excitement. "Did you all see the article?" she asked, waving the paper in the air. Marcus hadn't seen it, but he had been expecting it. A local reporter had heard about what happened at Tony's store and had been investigating the story for weeks, interviewing everyone involved and following up on how their lives had changed. "Read it to us," Kevin requested, pausing in his work. Mrs. Rodriguez cleared her throat and began reading. 6 months ago, an attempted robbery at Tony's convenience store on Maple Street could have ended in tragedy. Instead, it became the beginning of one of the most remarkable stories of community intervention and personal transformation our city has seen. The article went on to describe the events of that October night, but it focused more on what had happened afterward. Kevin's successful recovery from drug addiction, his enrollment in college, and his promotion to assistant manager. Rico's transition from dealing drugs to legitimate employment and his plans to start his own delivery service. Danny's success at the warehouse and his growing reputation as a mentor to other young fathers. The real hero of this story, Mrs. Rodriguez continued reading, may be Marcus Williams, the single father who chose compassion over fear when faced with an armed robbery. But Williams himself insists that what happened was simply the result of a community coming together to solve a problem. The article included quotes from Marcus that he had given reluctantly. "I didn't do anything special," the newspaper quoted him as saying. "I just treated Kevin like a human being who was in trouble instead of a criminal who deserved punishment." Anyone would have done the same thing. But everyone who knew Marcus understood that wasn't true. Most people faced with an armed robber would have prioritized their own safety above all else. Marcus had chosen to see past the weapon and the crime to the desperate young man underneath, and that choice had changed multiple lives. The article also mentioned the broader impact of the story. Tony's store had become a model for how small businesses could work with community members to address local problems. The city council had started a program connecting young people in trouble with job opportunities and support services, based largely on what had happened at Tony's store. Several other business owners had reached out to offer jobs and mentorship to young people struggling with similar issues. A local church had started a fund to help people dealing with drug debts find alternatives to crime. Even the police department had changed some of its policies about how officers respond to situations involving young offenders. The most remarkable thing about this story, the article concluded, is that it demonstrates how one person's decision to respond with empathy instead of fear can ripple out to benefit an entire community. Kevin finished reading and looked around at everyone in the store. "You know what's funny? I used to think that night was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Now I think it might have been the best thing." "Why do you say that?" Marcus asked. "Because if I hadn't gotten desperate enough to try robbing this store, I never would have met any of you. I'd probably be dead by now, or in prison, or still using drugs in some alley somewhere." Tony nodded thoughtfully. "It's strange how life works, sometimes. The worst moments can turn into the most important moments if the right people are involved. Mrs. Rodriguez had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. I think what happened here wasn't really about one night or one decision. It was about all of us choosing to help each other day after day, even when it was difficult. She was right, Marcus realized. The night of the robbery had been dramatic, but the real work had happened in the months that followed. Kevin's daily struggle to stay clean. Rico's decision to keep showing up to work even when dealing drugs seemed easier. Danny's commitment to being a good father and employee even when he was exhausted from working double shifts. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from Emma, who was now 9 and increasingly independent. Dad, Mrs. Chen says I can walk to Tony's store by myself to buy my snack for tomorrow's field trip. Can I? Marcus looked around the store at Kevin, Rico, Tony, and Mrs. Rodriguez, people who had become like family over the past 6 months. Tell her yes, he texted back. But tell Kevin I said to make sure you get the good cookies, not the stale ones. As the evening wound down and the store prepared to close, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that October night. Emma was thriving in school and had developed a special friendship with Kevin, who often helped her with homework when Marcus was working late. Marcus himself had been promoted at the warehouse and was now training new employees, many of whom were young people facing challenges similar to what Kevin had experienced. The ripple effects continued to spread in unexpected ways. Rico had reconnected with his grandmother through Mrs. Rodriguez and was now helping to care for her as her health declined. Danny and his girlfriend had gotten married and were planning to buy a house in the neighborhood. Even the drug dealers, who had originally threatened Kevin, had largely moved on to other activities, finding that their customer base had diminished as more young people found legitimate opportunities. You know, Kevin said as he locked up the cash register. Sometimes people ask me what I learned from all this, and I never know what to say. What do you mean? Marcus asked. I mean, I learned a lot of obvious stuff, like don't do drugs and don't try to rob stores, Kevin said with a laugh. But the thing that really changed my life wasn't learning what not to do. It was learning that there are people in the world who will help you figure out what to do instead. Tony smiled as he turned off the lights. That's the most important lesson of all, Kevin. None of us can make it through life completely on our own. As they all prepared to leave the store, Marcus looked back at the place where his life had taken such an unexpected turn 6 months earlier. The attempted robbery that could have ended in tragedy had instead become the beginning of something beautiful. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are always opportunities to choose compassion over fear, understanding over judgment, and hope over despair. As they all prepared to leave the store, Marcus looked back at the place where his life had taken such an unexpected turn 6 months earlier. The attempted robbery that could have ended in tragedy had instead become the beginning of something beautiful. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there are always opportunities to choose compassion over fear, understanding over judgment, and hope over despair. Walking home to Emma, Marcus realized that the newspaper article had gotten one thing wrong. He wasn't the hero of this story. The real heroes were all the people who had chosen, day after day, to believe that everyone deserves a second chance, and that communities become stronger when they work together to lift up their most vulnerable members. That night, as he tucked Emma into bed, she asked him about the newspaper article she had seen Mrs. Rodriguez reading. Daddy, are you famous now? Marcus laughed. No, sweetheart. I'm just a regular dad who was in the right place at the right time to help someone who needed it. Will you help me if I ever need it? She asked. Always, Marcus promised, kissing her forehead. But you know what? You're going to grow up knowing that there are lots of people in the world who will help you if you need it. And someday you'll be able to help someone else who needs it too. As Emma drifted off to sleep, Marcus understood that this was perhaps the most important outcome of everything that had happened. His daughter was growing up in a community where she could see firsthand that people take care of each other, that everyone deserves compassion, and that even the most difficult problems can be solved when people work together. The story that had begun with a desperate young man and an unloaded gun had become something much larger, a testament to the power of human kindness and the extraordinary things that can happen when ordinary people choose to treat each other with dignity, respect, and love.